I just want to tell a short story which will then allow me to make a couple of points. I was in Holland just a few months ago, and I was at a conference co-sponsored by two groups, Sabile, Netherlands, and Friends and Kairos, Netherlands. So these are two grassroots organizations of Christians in the Netherlands. And they were running a conference that was also partially supported by the Protestant Church of the Netherlands, which is the old, basically the Dutch Reformed Church, and the Lutherans, because they put it together. It's really like the mainstream church, Protestant Church of the Netherlands. And it was really, we were hosting a Palestinian delegation and some other internationals like me who were invited to speak. It was basically for theologians, church people, and general public in the Netherlands. And there was a panel. And this panel was about the Kairos Palestine document. And of course the Dutch, it's a very flat country, and sort of the philosophy of being Dutch also is that everything has to be fair, everything has to be on a level playing field. All opinions have to be given, and we have to be fair about everything. And so this panel had people on it who were sympathetic, or quote, sympathetic to the Palestinian Kairos document, but also people who were expected to be critical. And there were two panelists whose statements stood out for me. One was the executive head of the whole church of the country. And he said, look, I think we have to be very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, and this is a terrific document, but I can't endorse it. I can't endorse it because it mentions BDS. And we Dutch were occupied by the Germans during World War II. We know all about Nazi Germany. And boycotting Israel is singling out a particular people for punishment. We've seen that, he said, referring, of course, to the Nazi laws in the 30s in Germany. We've seen that, and we can't go in that direction. End of story. Then they had a local rabbi. And the local rabbi got up and said, look, I'm very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. Obviously, they're suffering a lot, but I can't endorse this document. I can't endorse this document because it leaves out the Jewish narrative. I want to say something about that, and then I'll come back to the church guy and the point that brings up. Luckily, I think it was probably a good thing I wasn't on that panel because I would have had to answer both of them, and it wouldn't have been a very Dutch kind of experience. But something became very clear to me in terms of my own answer to the rabbi, which is that he's completely wrong. He's wrong because the Palestinian Kairos document does include the Jewish narrative. In fact, it is the Jewish narrative for today. The Nakba, thus the other story of 1948, is the Jewish story. It must be the Jewish story, not just the Israeli story, but the Jewish story. And unless and until we Jews understand that, embrace that story and say, this is our history, we need to know what we've done, we need to acknowledge that, and then go from there, we're done for. As far as the church story is concerned, that was Holland. It's a somewhat different context, but in fact, it tells a story of the Christian conundrum here in this country and in the West in general. And you know it well. You can stand up for human rights causes anywhere, in your backyard, anywhere across the world, but not for Palestine. Why? Because of the Christian responsibility for 2,000 years of Jewish suffering. So you can't go there. And there are rules about that, most of them unwritten, about what Christians are allowed to do or allowed to say. And that is true in the pulpits, It's true in the pews. It's true in personal relationships. It's true in the academy. There are red lines about what people can say and what they can publish. And the red line is you cannot say anything. I mean, you can make noises about the Palestinian issue, but you can't do anything or say anything that would challenge the fundamental Zionist narrative, which is that the Jews have a fundamental right to the land. Theologically, historically, what have you. That's a red line. And it's especially true in the seminaries, which is really, I think, significant. So, clearly, and that's what we're about today, it's time to change those rules. We've been focusing on the media. It's time to change those rules across the board. And we're all involved in doing that, or need to be involved in doing that, in our own ways, given our own talents, desires, professional connections, and what have you. We have to change the discourse. One thing that I think is particularly important to know in terms of the whole issue about Jewish sensibilities and Jewish sensitivities is that Christians confuse the struggle, the cause for social justice and human rights for Palestine, and that includes the Israelis who are suffering under this. You've heard about that today. That society is deeply troubled. You know, Sahar going to have a country that she can belong to, even be proud of, and want to raise her children in. I mean, it's a huge issue. There's a confusion between that and the very focused, faithful, important Christian project that's been going on since the end of World War II to cleanse its theology of the toxic, vicious anti-Semitism and to reconcile with the Jewish people. Now, that's a good thing. That needs to happen. Anti-Semitism is real. None of us, I mean, Jews, are naive about that. It's out there. It scares me. What Israel's doing scares me even more about anti-Semitism, but that's another story. That's a good thing. But the tragedy of the current situation is that that's in direct conflict with the struggle for Palestinian human rights and in this conflict, which is a world issue. And people need to be very clear that taking up the cause for justice in historic Palestine is not an interfaith issue. And if you wait for the Jews to bless this institutionally, or even for your Jewish friends and colleagues to bless this effort, if you take it on, you will wait too long. And I can give you very little comfort about the fact that, yes, that's a problem. Problem with your relationships, especially professional relationships. You're going to lose friends, you'll be called names. And it's up to you to decide whether or not you want to do that. But if you're not willing to do that, then don't take this on. I was in South Africa. It's funny how leaving the United States makes everything very clear to you about the United States. I was in South Africa, and I discovered the South African Kairos document. I discovered the church people who courageously took up the cause to end apartheid in South Africa. And to make a very long story very short, what they did was to take on their own church. They said, we aren't complicit. Our church invented apartheid 100 years before the National Party came into power in 1948. They segregated the church, and we've been supporting, with our theology, apartheid all along. It's the end of that. Now, the context of this was the 80s, where the South African government, already on the ropes, was trying like crazy to hold on to power and to preserve apartheid, and they were doing it through a program of reforms. You know, we'll put blacks in the parliament, and we'll do something, you know, we'll do humanitarian stuff, and we'll pour money into the townships, and by the way, we'll have a two-state solution. We'll give them a state. We'll surround the state. We'll own the state. You know, but it'll be a two-state solution. That was a reform. Sound familiar? And of course, it was a lie. And the church people said, no. Apartheid is evil. It challenges us as Christians. It challenges us as human beings. It can't be reformed. It's illegitimate. The government that is promoting it and running it is illegitimate. It has to come down. And the world heard that, and the churches of the world heard that, and within 9 years, apartheid was gone. It was the tipping point. And what came to me when I was in South Africa was, it was one of these experiences. That's our context here. Not the Palestinian argument. That's a call to us. But it's not our context here. Our context is the same as the South Africans, who realized that their target had to be their own government. And, by the way, their own church, which was supporting, either passively or actively, the policies of its own government. And if you take a look at the situation, it's not about Ramallah, and it's not about Tel Aviv, it's about Washington. There would be no occupation without Washington. That wall is our wall. It's our colonial imperial frontier that we're building. Just like, if we're building it on our own borders. That's our extended border. So it's all about Washington. It's all about changing policy, and it's all about creating a constituency that will do that. The media is a huge part of that. The church is another huge part of that. And the South African example is a prime one. The other one is the civil rights movement here. Where did it start? Before it took over the whole society. In the churches, black pastors, and they were the leaders, and then it spread to the whole society. So the church can do it, and the church is already organized, and the church has to be in alliance and in coalition with the other grassroots movements, whether they call themselves, whether they're, faith movements or not. So it's Kairos USA. Now here's the thing about Kairos USA. There are people in various denominations, including Roman Catholics, who've been working on this for decades, and they're tired. Now they're getting somewhere, and they're tired. But they don't work together. There's no home for them. There are evangelicals who are working on this. Don't generalize about evangelicals. Evangelicals, because they're out there working in the rest of the world, understand that the dominant American narrative is not true, and they're working with their theology to make that work, and they're very involved. And they don't know that there are mainline Protestants out there who are working on this too, who will talk to them. And when I talk to the mainline Protestants, and I say, there are evangelicals who are working on this? And they say, do they talk to us? It will be a place for Christians of all stripes to come together. It's a Christian effort. There may be Jews, Muslims, people who don't affiliate at all with any faith tradition who will be part of that, but it's Christian. Because it's the church, and the church in America. And the church in America potentially is extremely powerful. In my experience as a Jew who spends all his time speaking in churches is that there's an enormous hunger out there among Christians to do what they want to do as faithful Christians. So I will just end with that. My South African friends say to me, I'm talking to them, especially the church people, who are amazing. These are people who were underground for 20 years, who saw their friends die. It's amazing. I say, how did you do it? Because we need to do it in the United States about Palestine. And they say, yes, you're right. You've got it. It's a good analogy. The only thing is, given what you're looking at now, it makes what we did look easy. And they're right, and you know why. But it says in the Talmud, just because the work is hard and I can't finish it, I am not free to desist from it.